Partial funding for the operation of this channel is provided by the City of Oceanside. The content of the program and opinions expressed in PEG Access programs are the sole responsibility of the program producers.
Hello and welcome to Faith and the Common Good. I am your host, Pastor Harris. Our program is sponsored by North Coast United Methodist Church, and we welcome you to this edition of Faith and the Common Good. Today we will be talking about art and its meaning in our society, how art contributes to our living and understanding, and how art contributes to the formation of our personhood. We welcome this day our guest from the Oceanside Museum of Art here in the city of Oceanside, the Executive Director, Daniel Foster. Thank you so much, Daniel.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
We are so grateful that you have taken the time from your busy schedule to be here today.
Any time for you.
That's wonderful. I am so grateful to you and for the work that you do for the Oceanside Museum of Art and the work that it does to perpetuate the value of art in our community.
Yep.
Firstly, let's talk about the museum, and if you could offer just an overview of your mission and what activities you're currently involved in.
Sure. The Oceanside Museum of Art started in 1995 and is a young museum in Southern California, and it's a regional museum, which means we serve the region of San Diego and Southern California and the plethora of tastes of the population. So we're a generalist museum. We opened up in a very much expanded space from an original Irving Gill building that was the old City Hall in 1934 and expanded fivefold to 26,000 square feet in 2008 and have 6 premier galleries that we program about 25 exhibitions a year of great diversity. Our mission is to be a premier regional art museum for San Diego and Southern California, and a leader of arts and culture in North County at a time that 1.3 million population in North County need very strong cultural institutions in their neighborhoods and not having to travel to LA and downtown San Diego to find the quality offerings that our museum and other cultural institutions offer.
Well, thank you for that. And if you could then continue with perhaps information about the current exhibits and those that are forthcoming.
Well, as I said, we're a regional museum, so we regard our primary mission on the history of traditional and contemporary art of San Diego and Southern California, and we're in transition from a block of 5 shows that were all around different angles of view on the subject of portraiture, and we're moving into actually a major show that's going to chronicle the last 100 years of the great artists of San Diego to tie it into the centennial celebrations that's going on. As an example of the shows that we have right now that are cycling out and having new shows coming in, a great retrospective on homeless individuals in downtown San Diego that bring the humanity of the homeless population forward in a way that Pablo Mason, the photographer, Pablo Mason is actually a photographer with my sister's voice that focuses on 40 important women in our community. But we're also looking at subjects of different population groups that don't have a strong voice. And we regard it as very much of our mission to bring the stories of our communities forward to be that intersection of debate of what's important in our lives and how art can intersect all of us in our community about our lifestyles and unite us and build understanding.
Well, again, we want to thank you for that good work and its contribution to our holistic appreciation of each other, adding to that the appreciation of creation itself, and combining the elements into an operable way to talk about what it is we experience in light of what we call art. So let's move into a definition of art. For you, what is the definition of art?
There's a lot of definitions because art to me is everything under the sun, and what artists tee up for us to build better understanding and inspiration and enlightenment and uniting of ourselves together. Fundamentally, I think art is about the pursuit of either beauty or truth. And I think beauty is not always truthful, and I think truth is not always beautiful. And what field or industry deals with these two main human qualities of beauty and truth, other than the art world that does it so well. So I like to think that that is the material of what an art museum institution and the art world deals with, is these notions of beauty and truths of our lives.
And from that we can talk about what have been labeled as forms of art, either fine art or folk art, performing art or visual art, and now we move into, as we have perhaps for the last 10 years or so, the notion of digital art, and each then becoming an expression of self, an expression of society, an expression of the world and all therein. So there are many ways that we can approach the conversation about art, but we want to focus today particularly on how art assists in forming our character, how art assists in forming our ability to be in conversation with one another, as well then as how it assists our ability to offer that expression of beauty or that expression of truth. So let's begin firstly with perhaps an expanded conversation around what you see as the purpose of art. Why art?
I think the purpose is to build greater understanding of the diversity of our lifestyle and our social, political, spiritual condition of the world, which has great diversity. And I've long lamented the last 100 years was this compartmentalization of activity. You're a painter, you're a photographer, you're a musician, you go to art school and you're over in the corner in one department. And I think it's very indicative of specialization that ran amok in the 20th century, that most disciplines to compete needed to know a lot about one little narrowed band of something and didn't know much about the larger forest, so to speak. I see that changing the last 20, 30 years in our society and in the art world. Now folk art and craft are widely accepted in the serious high art world, and I think artists are now doing hybrid, multidisciplinary approaches, just as we're finding in industry. Businesses are starting to see the gaps between things and the bigger picture of our world and our society, and dealing with very complex issues that require generalists to address them versus specialists that only know their one thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think as we talk about the sense of segmentation or being able to focus vocationally in one direction versus having the larger, the more holistic picture, art helps to then synthesize many disciplines in a way that other disciplines are not able so to do. So then art becomes part of that formative aspect of, again, our personhood. If we can then speak for just a bit about that sense of formation, specifically formation of the spiritual self.
Yeah. Well, I fundamentally believe art is spiritual technology, and I didn't invent that. That's an ages-old concept that's come out of various spiritual practices. I believe that anyone who engages the arts, either through the creative process and act themselves or through the engagement of a material object called art, which actually has the imbued, infused spirit of the artist and the content issues that they're dealing with in the material world. They give birth to it, it goes out in the world, and viewers engage that work and feel that spirit back. To me, I think, and I also would say from my own experience, I didn't expect to grow up into the art world. I expected to grow up into the business world as an oldest child, but it was through my own practice of making a work of art in my late 20s without any serious intentionality that tapped into the deepest spiritual, soulful place inside me that had never been touched before. And I rewrote my entire life in the spot. I think art creates that possibility of a very deep, intimate connection into a spiritual path on a minute-by-minute basis when you're particularly in the process of creating. God is the ultimate creator. Artists are creators. There is a simpatico relationship between the two, and so I'm a very strong believer in the spirituality of art and the power that that has in our world to tap into people that are disconnected from spiritual paths.
And with that in mind, we can consider the work of art in the church over time. The church as institution, the church as place of gathering community, the church as a place of edifying and lifting up and encouraging. visual art in particular, musical art in particular, as well as the arts of movement, the liturgical dance, have all been vehicles for elevating and animating that notion of the spirit.
Yep.
And so we, especially as we look at ways that community is moving from virtual environment back perhaps to a desire to be in physical connection with one another, the arts become the language of that physical connection. So we could say that art is the language of the soul. Perhaps we could say that music is the language of the heart. Perhaps we could say that visual art is the language of the mind, because it forces us to think in different ways, and looking and incorporating the sight of something. As you've noted, the material something helps us to expand in ways that we otherwise would not. So when we're talking about art, we are talking about something that is critical and endemic to what it is to be human.
Yeah, I would expand on it. Art is about the mind, but it's about the heart. It is about the soul. It's about the body. It's about every substance element of our life. And that's what artists are special to do, is they bring the importance of that forward in our utilitarian day, where we're chasing a million things on our to-do list, and it taps into really what is real and valued and timeless and universal in our world of transient kind of fads that are going on.
Archaeological digs will seldom find the printed word, but will often find the arts and crafts, the idealized work of the time that help us to understand the time. So art
what better way to understand history of any culture or people than to look at their art? You can read it in a history book, and that's a little bit more literal and maybe academic, but the best way to learn about life and history is through the artists that were the mirror of their time.
I'm going to ask you a question then, if we can project forward just a little bit. What do you think those who are on archaeological digs looking at our time or finding information about our time, what do you think is going to be most reflected of our time?
Wow. There's so much ways to go on that. First of all, I would say we're at a real precipice of this history of elitism that has really mired the accessibility of art to all. I feel history of art has been really about the 1% power politics that have gone on with cultural institutions that have made these institutions very foreboding and intimidating to the general public. But now with the internet and with other vehicles of artists building to, it's empowering artists to find their audience and not have to do it in the traditional kind of institutional ways. There will always be a need for a museum and for certain kind of tastemakers that direct the general public's attention to some things that are really important and to attach scholarship to that. But I think just like the Hollywood power structure that changed with writers and actors that used to be at the bottom moving to the top, same thing is happening in the art world. Artists, true talented artists, are going to find their audiences globally through the plethora of new vehicles of connecting to audiences that the more staid status quo art world, they better keep up with that, or they're going to be left behind, and institutions like ours are going to be dinosaurs if they continue to cater to a very small fraction of the public.
So I would ask you then, how is Oceanside Museum of Art facilitating that trajectory? How are you beginning to do the work?
It comes down to our programs and our events, and it comes down to the leadership of me and the board and our organization saying the values that we stand on are the ones that I'm speaking about, and that we do program to all, and we do value diversity, and we do have programs that introduce people in layman terms how to access into the arts versus the history of education and affluence that positions people into the access, and if you don't have that, then you feel really not welcomed and not really served, actually.
Art can be very provocative.
Yeah.
According to...
Life can be very provocative.
Absolutely. And you know, again, reiterating the point that art is a reflection of life, as well as art being a reflector on life.
Right.
And so what would you offer then as a comment about the aspect of the artist as reflector?
so important. Where else do we find individuals in our common culture that are teeing up the important debate and dialogue that needs to happen, that unite diverse populations that are segregated from each other? It's the artist and their artwork that often is the place that brings people into dialogue, that forms understanding and unites all of us in the end to overcome ignorance and hatred and the ills of the world. So you can probably name a few other places like churches, and I suppose the political forum, in theory, creates context for a debate, but this doesn't happen often enough in our daily lives of communities. And this is the thing I appreciate the most of a role of a museum, is how we can pull in that debate, that whole community to debate and understand each other and form a greater sense of enlightenment and awareness that it takes all of us.
Surely.
And that's the role that artists and artworks actually have, is pulling us all together to unite us.
Absolutely. And so from a theological perspective, I would say that art is a vehicle to lead us to peace. And in our conversations around art, in our appreciation of art, we find ourselves, and perhaps even we find answers that will help us to resolve especially the communicative issues that we currently face in our society. Thank you so much, Daniel, for your time and your expertise and your passion for art. Thank you also. We will return shortly. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to Faith and the Common Good, brought to you by North Coast United Methodist Church. I am your pastor, as well as pastor of that congregation, and today I am your host. We welcome for this segment Manuelita Brown, who is a North County artist. Actually, she is an artist across the nation. Her works are represented in several museums and collections around the country. And we welcome Mrs. Brown to this table today to talk about our continuing conversation on art. Art is a reflector of society. The artist is an observer and one who often offers commentary on society. And so we're pleased to be able to have this conversation with an artist among us. Welcome, Mrs. Brown, to this conversation. I'm so glad that you were able to take the time today to come and offer reflections on your work as a sculptor. You are in the Encinitas area, and so we can claim you as our own in this North County area. Yes. But we are grateful that you are exhibited across the country and perhaps internationally as well. And we look forward to more information about forthcoming exhibits, especially in our local area. Firstly, would you share with us your definition of art and perhaps how that has changed over time?
I haven't defined art explicitly such that it's easy to communicate what I think art is. But I find that typically art's an expression of an individual toward the society they're living in. And so that includes people who write, people who do two-dimensional art, as well as people who do three-dimensional art. Also includes choreographers of dance. All of those things, I think, are ways that an individual interacts with their environment and with the society that they live in. And so therein I find art.
Yes, indeed. And we firstly want to congratulate you for the installation and the unveiling of Sojourner Truth, a bronze sculpture, and you can tell us some more about that. That is now on the campus at the University of San Diego in La Jolla. Would you share with us Sojourner Truth and your work that has brought forth this installation?
Well, the project of getting an installation of Sojourner Truth lasted well over 2 years in the actual fabrication and building of the sculpture. But it became part of my mission to do the sculpture more than 15 years ago, when I responded to a recall for artists to do a life-size sculpture of Sojourner Truth for one of the towns that she lived in Massachusetts. And I did what I like to do when working on a historical piece. I read to find out as much as I could about the individual. I looked at images of the person and thought about what made this person do or be what we see her as today. And in reading about Sojourner Truth, I was captivated by what it took for her as a, I would say, 35, 40-year-old woman to essentially embark on an entirely new life. She changed her name. She had left pretty much of her own volition, being a slave, had reclaimed one of her children at least, and had a couple of others that she knew where they were, because at the time she was born and bore children, they were sold off to other families, sold off in slavery. She had a great, I'd call it, journey in discovering her faith. She did work with and have some very specific beliefs or changes in beliefs along the way. At one time, she was actually an itinerant Methodist preacher. She felt that part of the reason for choosing her name was she felt that it was her calling to tell people the truth, and her truth involved how she perceived the human race and its relationship to God. So even though she was an illiterate woman, she was well versed in the scriptures, and when I wanted to portray her, then I felt I needed to include the fact that she traveled across the landscape of New England, preaching and teaching and speaking on behalf of women's rights and the rights of the African descendants in the Americas. So therefore you see my image of her is a much younger woman than most people have pictured her, which was in her older age after she was famous and after she had been called into the White House by President Lincoln, etc. But I wanted people to see what it took to become this person that we now see on a stamp.
Absolutely. So then the extensive work of character study, placing the person in socio-historical or socio-political contexts becomes a journey of formation for you as an artist as well.
That's correct.
Could you speak then about the journey of formation as you engage your art?
For this particular piece, or for me becoming an artist?
For you becoming an artist, and then you can relate that to this particular piece.
Well, becoming an artist took a long journey for me as well, because I felt that I was an artist as a much younger person, as a child actually, and there are a few pieces of artwork left that I did pre-teens. On the other hand, it wasn't the only thing that I enjoyed doing. So choosing a career path was a challenge, plus my parents, who were regular working folks, my father a cab driver, and my mother, when she did start to work, was in civil service. The thought of being an artist was not a welcome thought, because it didn't, they had no idea that one could support themselves, and so the folklore about an artist is giving away your paintings for a meal, and then you become very famous once you're dead. So that wasn't the kind of career they saw for me. So other things that I enjoyed had to still do with making things, and also being involved in solving problems. So what I did as a first career was actually teach mathematics. And mathematics was fun. It was something I enjoyed doing. I also enjoyed helping people see that mathematics was natural and a part of the way their brains worked, so everybody can do it. And that was gave me great pleasure to help people demystify the concept of learning mathematics. So I had a full career as a math educator, and in the middle of that, I wanted to find out, how does our brain solve a problem? What is this aha phenomenon? You think you don't know what's going on, and you go to take a nap or go for a walk, and all of a sudden you do know what's going on. So I decided to go to graduate school and thought, well, people studying psychology should know. So I went to UC San Diego as a graduate student in the psychology department, and found that they were just beginning to work on understanding how the brain is functioning. And the group that I was working with was at the very early stages of dealing with artificial intelligence, and basically trying to find, and how I fit into the group with a background in mathematics. They were working on mathematic modeling for the brain's processes. And so I actually found that they didn't know and I didn't know. It was an interesting endeavor and it was fun. I love learning, so it was fun to be back in school, but it wasn't going to offer me a new career in that area. So I went back to teaching for a while, and as my family matured, that involved our sons growing up and my husband participating equally and sometimes more than equally in household chores. Then I went back to art, and so now I've concentrated this portion of my life on just being an artist.
Yes, finding a way after several opportunities to come back to your true heart, if you will. So we're grateful that that has happened as you have offered historical documentation in ways, as you've offered through your imaginations about the persons that you have sculpted and the sculptures that you have placed around the country, this monument, if you will, to the process of the life journey. And so as an artist, you offer commentary, whether that be as documentation or whether that be as imagination and futuring. You offer commentary to our living together and the development of our personhood as we seek to learn more about ourselves and learn more about global community. So then how then do you understand the work of the art as developing a global self, a global understanding?
My thought is divided into two parts. One is I do sculpture that relate to history, and I think in terms of remembering those people as human beings, as individuals, not as super extraordinary, but as ordinary people who did some extraordinary things. And so I'm particularly interested in making sculptures that represent them as real human beings, not as superhuman beings. On the other hand, I have a whole nother part of the art that I like to do, that I'm very much dedicated to, and that's doing bronze sculpture, or just doing sculpture, even if it's not ultimately in bronze, of ordinary human beings. People who don't see themselves as having done great things for society. But on the other hand, if you're the person who cleans the school that young people go to, and you provide a friendly face, and you're making a major contribution to the development of those young people. If you're the person who is the caretaker at home, and you have a small community there that you're caring for, maybe just your family or maybe the family and a few neighbors, you still are a very important part of the society. And so it's important to me that those people be recognized as part of an important part of the society. And in particular, I focus on women, because I think far too often, as is evident by the sparsity of women's images in sculpture, in particular, and women's artwork in museums. It's also many fewer than male representations. That I think I should make an effort to do something about that.
Yes, yes. And we thank you for making more than an effort, but making a significant impact on us as you create and as you share your heart and your faith and your experience and observation of life with others. We want to thank you so very much for this opportunity to be in conversation with you, and we look forward to more installations as they come forward. And if you are willing to come back again, we would hopefully have continued conversation about this very important and very rich subject. Thank you very much for today.
You're most welcome.
We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you again on Faith and the Common Good.